Hello everybody and welcome to another morning tarot. Thank you for joining me again today. We're doing the Suit of Cups and I'm just going to be doing the two cards today. That will be the Page of Cups and the Knight of Cups, and then I'll go on and do the King and the Queen and the Ace tomorrow in the same way that I did with the Swords. Just to mention, if anyone's interested in watching other videos in this series, I've got a playlist called Morning Tarot on my main page, so go ahead and have a look in there and you should be able to find the other ones quite easily. I've already done the Swords and working through the Cups at the moment. I'm a little bit sleepy this morning, so I'm not quite as bouncy, I don't think, as I normally would be. I've been awake for hours, I just couldn't sleep. Anyhow, right, let's get going. So, first off, Page of Cups. Now, I tend to think of the pages, as I think I've mentioned before, as being sort of quite representative of young people and youthful energy, just a younger feeling, because they are kind of the youngest of the four court cards anyway: pages, knights, queens and kings. However, I think that Page of Cups specifically is very representative of the idea of youth and of young people and young energy, perhaps more so than the other three pages that you'll find in the tarot deck. If you look at the page himself here, I'm afraid he is quite blurry, but he's enough that you can see kind of the impression at least of the image. He's standing with water in the background and he's very much in the foreground. There's something about his posture, I think, that's very playful. Hand on hip, one leg out, holding the cup. It's a very playful posture. I think that this does represent often as somebody who has a very playful kind of energy. Something that's quite eccentric about the personality that's represented by this card. And you can definitely see the eccentricity, not only in the way that the page is standing, but if you look at the hat, which actually looks very much like the fish. There's a fish peeping out of the cup, a kind of a fish type hat. The clothing is sort of a bit eccentric and flamboyant. It's red tulips on a blue background. There's a lot of water in this card, and cups being the suit of emotion and sort of feelings and emotional situations, love, romance, etc. And this would represent somebody who does have a lot of emotion, who's a very emotional person, a very sensitive kind of person, and there's a lot of sensitivity as well as kind of eccentric playfulness about this card. I just love the fish sticking out of the cup. That really is what represents eccentricity here to me, like harmless eccentricity. And I think that you're looking at somebody who is very imaginative, very creative, and very much kind of a dreamer. You know, this is somebody who often lives kind of in their own world. They follow their own sort of little path. They look at things in a very unique kind of childlike way. And this kind of sense about this card of somebody who is a very sensitive person, who is a kind of a creative, imaginative kind of figure. This isn't somebody, I wouldn't say anyway, that is going to be very loud or very in your face. It's very much the water, the emotional side, and this sort of almost a quietness. I would say it's not somebody who's necessarily shy, but this is probably representative of somebody who lives very much in their inner world and can have a slight sort of naivety, quite endearing sort of naivety about them. So when you see this card in spread, if it represents a person, that's the sort of character that I think of when I see the Page of Cups. And it can be, for that reason, sometimes indicative that you or the person that you're reading for might be sort of a little bit too sensitive sometimes, and could be quite easily hurt by situations because they have this sort of inner innocence and this unique way, this kind of childlike young way of looking at the world. But I think it's just a really lovely character, a really lovely kind of personality that comes out with the Page of Cups. And second today, the Knight of Cups. Now, my interpretation of the Knight of Cups is a little bit different, actually, to the way a lot of people do interpret the Knight, and I will explain why. So, first off, the Knight of Cups, I guess in the ways that my interpretation is very similar to a lot of interpretations, he is very much thought of as the messenger card. He's wearing the wings of the messenger on his hat, the wings of the messenger on his boots, and he's very much often associated with the coming of news, with the coming of a message, with the sort of a coming of change in some sort of way. Also, the wings, I believe, can be representative of Mercury, which means that this is somebody who can be quite mercurial, who is an emotional person, because the cups do represent emotion, but can sort of switch in their emotions back and forth. So one minute they might be sort of romantic and happy and loving, and the next minute they might be kind of really introverted and introspective, and can be a little bit moody. This is someone I think who can be quite moody. As I mentioned before, I do think there's very often a progression when it comes to looking at the court cards. So we've got the Page of Cups, this really sort of sensitive, childlike sense of wonder and awe and imagination. And I think the Knight of Cups also shares that kind of sensitivity and that emotional side. But when I look at the Knight of Cups, I tend to think of this as somebody who is definitely very fickle. I think that it can very often represent a lover or a romantic relationship, and somebody who has romantic ideals, often somebody who might be too in love with the idea of love, so more in love with the idea of love than actual love itself, which is why I think this is someone who can actually be quite fickle, who might flip from one attachment to another, who might come full on with all the hearts and flowers and romance and love poems and things one minute, and the next minute they're on to the next thing, they're on to the next kind of person or the next situation. So I think that there can be a lack of consistency that comes with the personality that is represented by this card. It's very much somebody who I think has this idea of courtly love. I mean, he's sort of bearing the cup and riding the horse and sitting up very straight. It's quite sedate, as a very much like kind of a courtly, romantic, sort of like traditionally medieval feeling, you know, the knight going to the tower to rescue the lady, or something like that. What I think that I associate with the Knight of Cups, which I'm going to show you here. We haven't covered this card. This is the Death card, which we will cover at some point when I do the Major Arcana. Don't be alarmed by this card. But what I want to sort of demonstrate by bringing it up today is, if you have a look at the posture of the figure here, the skeleton on the card, the way the horse is standing, the way he's carrying the banner, and compare that to the Knight of Cups, you'll see that actually you're looking at a horse that's in the same sort of position, standing the same way. You're looking at a rider in the same sort of position. There's a lot of similarity between these two cards in composition. And in the tarot deck, there are no mistakes when it comes to what you put into a card and how the cards are drawn and what's depicted in a card. So I think that that is not a mistake, that there is a kind of a similarity in the posture and the structure of the Knight of Cups card and the Death card. And so the reason I think this is, and the reason that I kind of associate the two together, is that the Death card is a card that talks about transition and change and the ending of something and the beginning of something else. And I think the Knight of Cups for me always has a slight sense of almost emptiness to it. I do tend to think of this card as being somebody who perhaps makes empty gestures. You know, he's very still, he's riding like the figure of death. And so I think that even though on the surface this might seem like a situation where there's a lot of emotion, I do think that often that this card can represent an empty gesture or something along those lines. I don't think this is necessarily a popular interpretation of this card, but this is what I think of. So I'm always a little bit wary about the sincerity perhaps of the person or the situation that's represented by this card, though, you know, it looks really great on the surface. I don't think it's somebody who would intentionally be deceptive or is trying to do something unpleasant. You know, I think this is a nice person, it's a decent person, but because of this feeling of inconsistency, because of this sort of similarity in composition with the Death card, I do think that often this person might not be as sincere as they think they are, and so you have to look out for sort of a propensity to be changeable in nature. Now, please do a VR and tell us what this card means to you, because I know that that's probably slightly controversial as a reading for the Knight of Cups. Of course, what really counts when you're reading tarot and reading tarot spreads is to really understand what the card means to you, because you're the one who is going to be interpreting, you're the one who's going to be drawing the cards and pulling it together. And so I guess I hope you all have a really nice afternoon, morning, etc. Bye!